The luxury sedan didn't park, it just slowed down enough to shove him out. Arthur hit the wet pavement hard, his expensive Italian suit tearing at the shoulder. He scrambled up, 45 years old and built like a fighter, but he was flailing at the air, crashing into a lamppost. "Help!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "I can't see!" Passers-by stepped around him, clutching their purses. "Another junkie," a woman sneered, pulling her child away. "Disgusting!" But from the diner window, Maya saw him stumble blindly toward the roaring traffic. She didn't think. She sprinted into the storm, grabbing his coat just inches from a speeding taxi. Arthur seized her wrist, his grip bruising. "Don't kill me!" he sobbed, trembling violently. "I'll sign the papers, just don't kill me!" Maya froze. There was no smell of alcohol on him, only the cold, sharp scent of pure terror. The rain wasn't just falling, it was punishing the pavement. Maya stood in the middle of the deluge, her waitress uniform instantly soaked through, the cheap polyester clinging to her skin. But she didn't feel the cold. All she could feel was the terrifying trembling of the man gripping her arm. Arthur wasn't just shivering, he was vibrating. His knuckles were white against her dark skin, his fingernails digging in as if she were the only solid thing left in a world that had suddenly dissolved. "It's okay!" Maya shouted over the roar of the passing traffic, trying to steady him. "You're safe! I've got you!" Arthur whipped his head around wildly, his dark sunglasses askew, water streaming down his face. "Where am I?" he gasped, his voice tight with panic. "I can't! I don't know where the wall is! The car! They pushed me!" "You're on 5th and Main," Maya said, guiding him toward the curb. "Come on, let's get you inside." She steered him toward the warm glow of the Golden Spoon diner, but as they reached the entrance, the glass door swung open. It wasn't to welcome them. Mr. Henderson stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a small man who took up a lot of space, wearing a tie that was too wide and a scowl that was permanent. He looked at Arthur, at the torn shoulder of his expensive suit, the mud on his knees, the frantic, blind movements of his head, and his lip curled in disgust. "Don't even think about it, Maya," Henderson barked, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. Maya stopped, water dripping from her nose. "Mr. Henderson, he's blind. He was almost hit by a taxi. He needs help." "He's a junkie," Henderson spat, blocking the entrance with his body. "Look at him, twitching like an addict looking for a fix. I don't want him in my diner. We have customers trying to eat their burgers without smelling wet dog and failure." "He's not a junkie," Maya argued, her voice rising. "He's hurt. Look at his hands. He's terrified." "I don't care if he's the Pope," Henderson said, checking his watch. "The district manager is coming in 2 hours for the inspection. If I see that filth inside my restaurant, you are fired. On the spot. Do you hear me, Maya? Fired." The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Fired. Maya felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She needed this job. Her rent was 3 days late. Her daughter Zoe needed new shoes for school. This shift was supposed to be the one that proved she was ready for the assistant manager position. Losing this job wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be a catastrophe. It would mean eviction. She looked at Henderson. He was dead serious. Then she looked down at Arthur. He had stopped screaming, but now he was making a low, keening sound in his throat, a sound of pure animalistic despair. His lips were turning a frightening shade of blue. He looked less like a man and more like a broken child. If I leave him here, Maya thought, he dies. He walks back into traffic, or the hypothermia takes him. She looked at the warm, dry diner. Then she looked at the man shivering against her side. "I hear you, Mr. Henderson," Maya said quietly. Henderson smirked, thinking he had won. "Good. Now get back inside and bleach the entryway. You're dripping everywhere." He turned and walked back into the diner, letting the door slam shut. Maya didn't follow him. Instead, she turned to Arthur. She began to unbutton her burgundy diner blazer, the official uniform jacket with the Golden Spoon logo embroidered on the pocket. It was the only layer keeping the biting wind off her chest, but she peeled it off without hesitation. "Here," she whispered, wrapping the jacket around Arthur's soaking wet shoulders. It was too small for his broad frame, but she pulled the lapels tight, trying to trap whatever body heat he had left. It's not much, but it's dry on the inside. Arthur flinched at the touch, then slumped into the warmth, clutching the fabric as if it were a lifeline. Thank you, he chattered, his teeth clicking together. Thank you. We can't go in the front, Maya told him, her mind racing. But I'm not leaving you out here. She grabbed his hand firmly. Do you trust me? Arthur turned his head toward her voice. He couldn't see her, but he could feel the callus on her palm, the strength in her grip. Yes, he whispered. Okay, keep your hand on my shoulder. Follow my steps. Maya didn't take him to the main entrance. She guided him around the side of the building, down the narrow, trash-strewn alleyway where the dumpsters were kept. It was dark and smelled of old frying oil and wet cardboard, but it was out of Henderson's line of sight. She reached the heavy steel security door at the back, the delivery entrance. She fished her keycard out of her pocket, praying Henderson hadn't been watching the cameras yet. Beep! The light turned green. Maya hurried Arthur inside and closed the door softly behind them. They were in the dry storage room. It was a cramped space lined with floor-to-ceiling metal shelves stacked with industrial-sized cans of tomatoes, bags of flour, and boxes of napkins. It wasn't a VIP lounge. It was cold, concrete, and smelled of dust. But it was safe. Stay here, Maya whispered, guiding him to sit on a stack of plastic milk crates in the corner, hidden behind a pallet of soda boxes. If you stay quiet, nobody will know you're here. The vent pushes warm air right into this corner. Arthur sat down heavily, his long legs cramping. He reached up and touched the fabric of the jacket she had given him. He felt the cheap polyester, the embroidered logo. You work here, Arthur realized, his voice raspy. Your boss, he said he'd fire you. He talks a lot, Maya lied, though her heart was hammering against her rib. She was shivering now, standing in just her thin, white blouse, the dampness seeping into her bones. Don't worry about him, just breathe. I'm going to get you something warm. She turned to leave, to sneak back onto the floor before Henderson noticed her absence. Wait, Arthur said, reaching out into the darkness. What's your name? Maya paused at the door. It's Maya. Maya, Arthur repeated, testing the weight of the name on his tongue. He sounded like a man memorizing the coordinates of a lighthouse in a storm. I'll be right back, Maya, he whispered. Don't get fired for me. Too late to worry about that now, she muttered to herself, slipping back into the kitchen, praying her sacrifice wouldn't cost her everything. 3. Part 3. The Meal of Dignity. Maya returned 10 minutes later, slipping through the heavy steel door with the stealth of a cat. In her hands, she balanced a plastic takeout bowl steaming with clam chowder, the staff meal she was supposed to eat during her break, and a hunk of sourdough bread wrapped in a napkin. The storage room was dim, lit only by the sliver of light creeping under the doorframe. But what Maya saw made her pause. Arthur wasn't slumped against the wall in defeat. He wasn't curled in a ball. Despite sitting on a stack of dirty orange milk crates, despite the mud staining his knees and the water dripping from his hair, he sat with a spine of steel. He had buttoned the blazer she gave him all the way to the top. He had straightened his tie, feeling the knot with his fingers to ensure it was centered. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, his chin raised, listening to the hum of the freezer unit as if it were a symphony. He looked ridiculous in the setting, but his posture screamed authority. It was the muscle memory of a man who had spent 20 years sitting at the head of a mahogany table. I brought you something hot, Maya whispered, closing the distance. Arthur's head snapped toward her voice. Maya? Yeah, it's chowder. It's not fancy, but it'll stop the shivering. She placed the bowl in his hands. Arthur flinched at the heat, then gripped it tightly, the warmth seeping into his frozen palms. I don't have my wallet, Arthur said, his voice stiff. He sounded pained to admit it. My brother took my phone. And my wallet. I can't pay you for this. It's on the house, Maya said, pulling over a sack of flour to sit opposite him. Eat, before Henderson smells it. Arthur lifted the plastic spoon. His hand trembled. He tried to guide the spoon to his mouth, but his depth perception was gone, trapped behind a wall of darkness. The spoon hit his chin, spilling hot soup down the front of the shirt. The shirt he had just tried so hard to straighten. Arthur froze. He lowered the spoon, his face twisting in humiliation. "God damn it," he whispered, a sound of pure frustration. I can't even eat like a human being." He made a move to throw the spoon, to give up, but Maya's hand caught his wrist. Her grip wasn't forceful, it was grounding. "Hey," she said softly, "it's just soup. It spills on everyone, even people with 20/20 vision." She didn't take the spoon from him. She didn't feed him like a baby. She simply guided his hand, tapping the edge of the bowl so he could feel the rim, then guiding the path to his mouth once, establishing the muscle memory. 3 inches up, she instructed calmly. "There, you got it." Arthur took a bite, then another. He ate ravenously, the dignity of the boardroom forgotten in the face of primal hunger. After a few minutes, the color began to return to his cheeks. He lowered the bowl, taking a deep breath. "I haven't been blind my whole life," he confessed, staring blankly at the wall of tomato cans. "It's only been 6 months. Retinitis pigmentosa. It happened fast. I'm still learning the geography of the dark." "Is that why you were in the street?" Maya asked gently. "Did you get lost?" Arthur let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Lost? No. I was disposed of." He squeezed the plastic bowl, the plastic crinkling under his grip. "My brother Marcus. We were driving to the shareholders' meeting, or so I thought. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. the board votes on the future of the company. Marcus has been trying to prove I'm unfit to lead since the diagnosis. He says a blind man can't see the future." Arthur turned his face toward Maya, his dark glasses reflecting the dim room. He stopped the car 3 blocks away. He opened the door. He said, "If you can find your way to the meeting by yourself, Arthur, then maybe you deserve to keep the chair. If not, well, the world is a dangerous place for a cripple." Arthur's voice broke. "He pushed me out, Maya. My own blood. He pushed me out into traffic and drove away. He knows I can't navigate the city yet. He wanted me to get hit, or arrested, or just lost forever so he can take the gavel tomorrow morning." The silence in the storage room was heavy. Maya looked at this man, this stranger who spoke with words she usually only heard on the news, and she felt a familiar ache in her chest. "He thinks I'm broken," Arthur whispered, shame coloring his tone. "And look at me, hiding in a pantry, wearing a waitress's jacket. Maybe he's right." "He's not right," Maya said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through his self-pity. "He's just cruel, and there's a difference." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You think you're the only one who got thrown away like trash?" Maya asked. 2 years ago, my husband packed his bags while I was at work. We had just lost the house. Bankruptcy. He left a note on the kitchen counter saying he couldn't handle the weight of a failing family. Arthur turned his head, listening intently. "He left me with a 3-year-old daughter and $40 in the checking account," Maya continued, her eyes hard. "I slept in my car for 3 weeks. I washed my face in the McDonald's bathroom before interviews. I felt exactly like you feel right now, like I was dead weight." She reached out and tapped Arthur's knee. "But here is what I learned, Arthur. People like your brother, people like my ex, they leave because they are weak. They think power is about being on top, but real power is what you do when you hit the bottom." Arthur sat silently, absorbing her words. He had expected pity. He had expected shock at his story. He hadn't expected a mirror. "You are not broken," Maya said firmly. "You are just rebooting." She stood up, brushing flour dust off her skirt. "Your brother took your eyes," Maya said, her voice ringing with the wisdom of someone who had survived her own storms. "But he didn't take your brain, and he didn't take your feet." She grabbed his hand again, squeezing it. "Your eyes can't see the road anymore, Arthur, but your legs can still walk. And as long as you can walk, you can fight. Don't you dare give up on that vote. Don't you dare let him win just because he plays dirty." Arthur sat there, the taste of cheap clam chowder still in his mouth. For the first time in 6 months, since the lights had gone out in his vision, he felt a spark ignite in his chest. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was anger. The good kind. The kind that fuels engines. "You're right," Arthur whispered. He straightened his spine again, adjusting the collar of the waitress jacket as if it were ermine. "My legs can still walk." "Damn straight," Maya smiled. Suddenly, the heavy steel door banged open. Light flooded the room, blindingly bright. "I knew it!" Mr. Henderson stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the kitchen lights. He wasn't alone. 2 large dishwashers stood behind him. "I smelled the chowder," Henderson sneered, stepping into the room. "Stealing food, harboring a vagrant, and leaving your station during prep." He looked at Maya with a triumphant, malicious grin. "Get your purse, Maya, and take your boyfriend with you. You're done." The harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen spilled into the storage room, exposing their sanctuary. Henderson stood there, chest puffed out, enjoying the moment of discovery like a hunter finding prey in a trap. "I warned you," Henderson said, his voice dripping with venom. "I told you explicitly what would happen." He stepped into the cramped room, wrinkling his nose at Arthur, who was still sitting on the milk crates. "Look at this," Henderson scoffed, gesturing to the empty soup bowl. "Feeding the rats. You know that chowder comes out of your paycheck, right? Or wait, you don't have a paycheck anymore." Henderson snapped his fingers at the 2 dishwashers behind him. "Get him out! Drag him to the alley!" "Don't touch him!" Maya shouted, stepping between Henderson and Arthur. She wasn't a large woman, but in that moment she looked formidable. "He's leaving, just let him stand up." "I'm not waiting for him to find his legs," Henderson spat. He reached out and grabbed Arthur by the lapel of the jacket, Maya's jacket. He yanked hard. Arthur stumbled forward, disoriented by the sudden aggression. His knee hit the floor with a sickening thud. His dark glasses slid down his nose, revealing eyes that stared blankly at nothing, wide with sudden confusion. "Get up, you leech!" Henderson yelled, hauling Arthur toward the door. "You think you can just camp out in my stockroom? This is a business, not a homeless shelter." Arthur tried to find his footing, his hands scrabbling against a shelf for support, knocking over a stack of napkins. I am leaving," Arthur stammered, his voice tight. "Unhand me! You have no right to touch me!" "I have every right," Henderson roared, shoving Arthur out into the busy kitchen. The cooks stopped chopping. The waitresses froze with trays in their hands. Everyone stared as their manager manhandled the blind stranger. "You are trespassing! You are stealing! I should have you arrested for breaking and entering!" He pushed Arthur again, sending him stumbling into a prep table. Arthur gasped as his hip collided with the metal edge. "That's enough!" Maya screamed. She ran into the kitchen and grabbed Henderson's arm, digging her nails into his sleeve. She pulled him away from Arthur with a strength fueled by pure rage. "He is a human being!" Maya yelled, her voice echoing off the stainless steel walls. "Look at yourself! Bullying a blind man? Do you feel big, Henderson? Do you feel powerful?" Henderson shook her off, straightening his tie. He looked around at his staff, his face flushing red. He couldn't let a waitress undermine him. Not today. Not ever. "He's a vagrant," Henderson declared, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur. "And you? You're an accomplice. You brought a potential threat into a secure area. You violated health codes. You violated safety protocols." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police," Henderson announced, tapping the screen with dramatic flair. "I'm pressing charges, trespassing, theft of company property. Let's see how much sympathy the cops have for a junkie and a thief." Arthur froze. Police. If he was arrested, if he was booked, he would miss the meeting. He would be stuck in a holding cell while Marcus took the vote. It was exactly what his brother wanted. "No," Arthur whispered, panic rising in his throat. "Please, no police. I can't be delayed. I just need to leave." "Too late," Henderson sneered, holding the phone to his ear. But before he could hit dial, Maya moved. She didn't just step in front of Arthur. She planted herself like a shield. She looked Henderson dead in the eye, her chest heaving. "If you call the police," Maya said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "you're going to have to report 2 people." Henderson paused. "Excuse me?" "Because if you arrest him for trespassing," Maya said, "you're going to have to arrest me for inviting him in. I opened the door. I gave him the food. I gave him the jacket." She took a step closer to her boss. "And when the police get here," Maya continued, "I'm going to tell them exactly how you treat your staff. I'm going to tell them about the unpaid overtime. I'm going to tell them about the rats you ignore in the basement. I'm going to tell them everything, Henderson, and I will make sure the district manager hears it too." The kitchen was silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Henderson stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. He knew she meant it. A police report would mean an investigation. An investigation would mean scrutiny. And Henderson had plenty of skeletons in his own closet. He lowered the phone slowly. "You're protecting him?" Henderson asked, incredulous. "You're throwing away your job, your reputation, your future, for a stranger you found in the gutter?" "He's not a stranger," Maya said, glancing back at Arthur, who was standing tall despite the fear radiating off him. "He's a man who fell down, and unlike you, I know how to pick people up." Henderson laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "Fine," he said. "Have it your way. No police." He pointed to the back door. "But you're gone, both of you. Get out of my kitchen. Get out of my sight. And Maya, don't bother asking for a reference. You'll never work in this town again." Maya didn't flinch. She turned to Arthur. She gently took his arm. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's go." Arthur nodded, swallowing hard. He let her guide him past the staring cooks, past the smirking Henderson, and out into the alley. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind them with a final metallic clang. They were back in the rain. Maya had no job. Arthur had no company. But as they stood there in the downpour, Arthur felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt safe, because for the first time someone was standing between him and the wolves. Part 5. The Conversation in the Storm. The metal door clicked shut, locking them out. The sound was final, like a gavel striking a block. Maya and Arthur stood in the narrow alleyway, huddled under a rusted corrugated metal awning that barely extended 2 feet from the wall. The rain hammered against the tin roof, creating a deafening rhythm that enclosed them in a small, wet world. Water cascaded off the edge of the overhang like a curtain, blurring the view of the dumpsters and the street beyond. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. Without her blazer, which was still draped over Arthur's shoulders, she was exposed to the biting wind in just her thin white blouse. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and mascara ran down her cheeks, mixing with the rain. She slid down the brick wall until she was sitting on her heels, trying to make herself small to conserve warmth. "I'm sorry," Arthur said. He remained standing, leaning against the wall, his head tipped back as if trying to locate the sky he couldn't see. "You didn't have to do that, Maya. You shouldn't have done that." "He was going to call the cops," Maya said, her teeth chattering. "And you said if you got arrested, you'd lose everything. I couldn't let him win." Arthur turned his face toward her. "So you let yourself lose instead?" "I didn't lose," Maya muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. I quit before he could fire me. There's a difference." She wiped her eyes, frustrated tears springing up to replace the raindrops. "Who am I kidding? I lost. I lost big time." She rested her forehead on her knees. "I have a little girl, Zoe. She's 7. She thinks I'm a superhero because I bring her leftover pie." Maya let out a choked laugh. "Some superhero. I just got fired for hiding a man in a pantry. How am I going to pay rent on Tuesday? How am I going to tell her that Zoe's Bakery is canceled?" "Zoe's Bakery?" Arthur asked. His voice was soft, cutting through the noise of the storm. Maya looked up. It is, a dream. I make the best cinnamon rolls in the city. Ask anyone. I've been saving my tips in a jar for 3 years. I wanted to open a small place, just a counter and an oven, somewhere I didn't have to answer to a man like Henderson." She kicked a pebble into a puddle. "But that's gone now. Henderson will blacklist me. In this town, if you cross the Sterling Hospitality Group, you don't work in food service. I'm done." Arthur listened intently. He couldn't see the despair on her face, but he could hear it in the cadence of her breathing. He could hear the way her voice broke on the word done. He slowly slid down the wall until he was sitting next to her. He adjusted the jacket she had given him, her jacket, pulling it tighter around his own shoulders. Can I tell you a secret, Maya? Arthur asked. Maya looked at him. He looked like a wreck, muddy, bruised, blind. But there was something in his tone that commanded attention. What? Strategy, Arthur said. In chess and in business, sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to capture a queen. You think you just sacrificed your life, but maybe you just cleared the board. He turned his head toward her, a small, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. It was the first time she had seen him smile. It transformed his face from that of a victim to that of a leader. Henderson was a dead end, Arthur said. You were never going to open a bakery working for a man who counts napkins. You needed to leave. You just needed a push. A push? Maya scoffed. This wasn't a push. It was a cliff. Or a launch pad, Arthur countered. Perspective is everything. Darkness has taught me that. When you can't see the walls, you realize the room is much bigger than you thought. He reached out his hand, searching for her. He found her arm and moved his hand down to her wrist, feeling the fabric of her blouse. It was cheap, thin cotton. Then he touched the lapel of the jacket he was wearing, the polyester blend, the rough embroidery of the logo. This jacket, Arthur said, rubbing the fabric between his thumb and forefinger. It's cheap. It's poorly made. It doesn't breathe. Tell me about it, Maya shivered. I wore it for 2 years. But the person who wore it, Arthur continued, has a spine made of titanium. You have integrity, Maya. That is a resource more scarce than diamonds. Henderson didn't fire a waitress today. He lost an asset he couldn't afford. Arthur leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Do you believe in miracles, Maya? Maya looked at him. Right now? No. Right now I believe in pneumonia. Arthur chuckled. It was a warm, genuine sound. Fair enough, but humor me. Do you believe that one single moment can rewrite the entire code of your life? I don't know, Maya sighed. Maybe in the movies, not in the alley behind a diner. Especially in the alley behind a diner, Arthur corrected. That's where the best plots twist. He sat up straighter. His face became serious again. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating intensity. Maya, he said formally, what is your full name? Maya Williams, she answered, confused. Maya Williams, Arthur repeated. He said it slowly, emphasizing each syllable, filing it away into the steel trap of his memory. Maya Williams, mother of Zoe, maker of cinnamon rolls. He nodded once as if confirming a contract. I won't forget it. Before Maya could ask what he meant, a sound cut through the rain. It wasn't thunder. It was the low, powerful rumble of engines. Not the scrappy taxis or the city buses. This was the deep, throaty purr of precision engineering. Tires screeched on the wet asphalt at the end of the alley. Headlights, bright blue-white LED beams, swept across the brick walls, blinding them for a second. Maya scrambled to her feet, terrified. Henderson called the cops, she gasped. They're here! We have to run! She grabbed Arthur's arm. Arthur, get up! We have to go! Arthur didn't move. He tilted his head, listening to the engines. He heard the heavy doors slam. He heard the distinct click of expensive leather soles hitting the pavement. No, Maya, Arthur said calmly, reaching up to adjust his dark glasses. We don't have to run anymore. He stood up, shedding the posture of the invalid. He smoothed the lapels of the waitress jacket as if it were a 3-piece Armani suit. My ride is here. The alleyway, usually a dark tunnel of forgotten refuse, was suddenly bathed in a light so brilliant it felt like an alien abduction. Maya shielded her eyes, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It's the police, she hissed, grabbing Arthur's arm. Henderson actually called them. Arthur, don't say anything. Let me do the talking. I'll tell them it was my fault. But Arthur didn't shrink back. He stood taller, his chin lifting as if sniffing the air. That isn't a siren, Maya, he said calmly. That is a V12 engine. Before Maya could process what he meant, the back door of the diner burst open again. Mr. Henderson flew out, nearly slipping on the wet pavement. He wasn't holding a phone this time. He was holding a large golf umbrella. He looked at the blinding lights at the end of the alley, his eyes widening in recognition. "Oh my God," Henderson gasped, ignoring Maya and Arthur completely. He adjusted his tie frantically, wiping grease from his forehead. "It's not the police, it's the district manager. No, look at those cars. That's corporate. That's the owners." Three massive black SUVs, sleek and menacing like land sharks, idled at the mouth of the alley. Behind them, a long black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred silently. The rain slicked their tinted windows, making them look like impenetrable fortresses. Henderson's face went from angry to terrified, and then to a sickeningly sweet expression of servility. "You too!" Henderson barked at Maya and Arthur, waving his hands, shooing them like stray dogs. "Get behind the dumpster! Hide! If the owners see trash like you standing near the loading dock, I'm ruined! Move!" He didn't wait to see if they obeyed. Henderson ran toward the cars, popping his umbrella open, splashing through puddles with a desperate, eager smile plastered on his face. "Welcome! Welcome to the Golden Spoon!" Henderson shouted over the rain, bowing toward the lead SUV. "I am the general manager. So sorry about the weather." The doors of the SUVs opened in perfect synchronization. 6 men stepped out. They didn't look like restaurant owners. They looked like a siege unit. They were mountains of muscle wrapped in black tactical suits, earpieces coiled behind their ears, their movements sharp and precise. Henderson froze, his smile faltering. Gentlemen, can I help you? The entrance is around the front." The men ignored him. They didn't even look at him. They fanned out, scanning the alleyway, their eyes locking onto the 2 figures huddled by the brick wall, the soaking wet waitress and the blind man in the ill-fitting jacket. The lead security officer, a giant of a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, marched straight past Henderson. He moved with the urgency of a man rescuing a hostage. "Hey!" Henderson shouted, trotting after him, confused. "You can't go over there! That's just a disgruntled ex-employee and a homeless junkie! I was just about to have them removed!" The giant stopped. He turned slowly to look at Henderson. His eyes were colder than the freezing rain. "Remove yourself," the man growled. He shoved Henderson aside, not violently, but with the casual indifference of moving a piece of furniture. Henderson stumbled back into a puddle, his umbrella flying out of his hand. The giant continued his march until he stood directly in front of Arthur. Maya instinctively stepped in front of Arthur, her hands raised. "Don't hurt him!" she screamed, thinking these were debt collectors or thugs. "He doesn't have any money! Leave him alone!" The giant looked at Maya. He saw her fierce stance. He saw the way she was shivering, and he saw his boss wearing her jacket. His expression softened for a fraction of a second. Respect. Then he looked at the blind man. "Sir," the giant said, his voice booming in the narrow alley. To Henderson's absolute horror, the giant dropped to one knee in the mud. He bowed his head. "We tracked the emergency beacon in your watch," the giant said. "We feared the worst when the signal went dead." Arthur didn't look surprised. He simply reached up and touched the collar of the waitress jacket. "Silas," Arthur said. His voice was no longer the voice of the frightened victim. It was deep, resonant, and commanding. "You took your time." "Traffic was gridlocked, sir," Silas replied, standing up and snapping his fingers. Immediately, 2 other guards rushed forward with a large, dry umbrella and a thick cashmere coat. They moved around Maya as if she were made of glass, careful not to jostle her, but focused entirely on their target. "Mr. Sterling," Silas said urgently, draping the cashmere coat over Arthur's shoulders, over Maya's jacket. "We have a situation. Your brother moved the vote up. The board meeting starts in 45 minutes. He has declared you incapacitated and missing." "Of course he did," Arthur said, a cold smile touching his lips. "Marcus always was impatient." Arthur turned his head slightly. "Silas, is the helicopter ready?" "Waiting at the tower, sir. We can be in the boardroom in 20 minutes. "Good." Arthur took a step forward, guided by Silas's steady hand. Henderson, who was still sitting in the puddle, watched this unfold with his mouth hanging open. His brain was short-circuiting. The junkie, the vagrant, the man he had shoved, insulted, and threatened to arrest. Mr. Sterling?" Henderson squeaked. The name was legendary. It was the name on the paychecks. It was the name on the building. Arthur stopped. He turned his head toward the sound of Henderson's voice. "Ah," Arthur said. "The manager." Henderson scrambled to his feet, trembling so hard his knees knocked together. "Sir, I didn't know. You were in disguise. It was a test. Yes, a test. I was just protecting the store's image. You understand, right? Security protocol." Arthur didn't answer. He just listened to the man babble. Then Arthur turned to the dark void beside him. "Maya!" he called out. Maya was standing frozen against the wall, her eyes wide. She looked from the terrifying bodyguards to the Rolls-Royce, and then back to the man she had fed clam chowder. "I'm here," she whispered. Arthur held out his hand. He didn't need Silas to guide him this time. He knew exactly where she was. "Take my hand," Arthur said. "Why?" Maya asked, her voice shaking. "Because," Arthur said, "I have a meeting to attend, and I'm going to need someone I trust to tell me who is lying in that room." He waited. "And besides," Arthur added, a ghost of a smirk returning, "you're fired, remember? You need a ride." Maya looked at the open door of the Rolls-Royce. She looked at Henderson, who was now pale as a sheet, and she looked at Arthur's hand, the hand she had saved from traffic. She reached out and took it. "Silas," Arthur commanded, "help Ms. Williams to the car, and get someone to retrieve her things from the locker, everything." "Yes, sir." "Wait!" Henderson cried out, running forward again. "Sir, please! It was a misunderstanding. I'm a loyal employee. I've been here 5 years." Arthur paused at the door of the car. He didn't turn around. "Silas," Arthur said quietly, "ensure this man is removed from the property. He is trespassing." "With pleasure, sir," Silas replied, turning to Henderson with a predatory grin. As Maya slid into the soft leather interior of the Rolls-Royce, escaping the cold for the first time in hours, she watched through the rain-streaked window. She saw the mighty Mr. Henderson being escorted away from his own back door by 2 security guards, shouting excuses into the storm that nobody was listening to anymore. The conference room on the 50th floor of Sterling Tower was a fortress of glass and steel, floating above the city skyline. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Marcus Sterling sat at the head of the table. He was younger than Arthur, smoother, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Next to him, looking completely out of place in his cheap suit, sat Mr. Henderson. Marcus had summoned the manager as a character witness to seal Arthur's fate. "It brings me no pleasure to say this," Marcus said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "But my brother is not just physically compromised, he is mentally unstable. Mr. Henderson here confirms that Arthur was found wandering the alley behind our flagship diner, delirious, fighting with staff, and dressed in women's clothing." Henderson nodded vigorously, eager to please the new king. "It's true. He was violent. He didn't know where he was. It was a tragedy, really. I had to protect the customers." The board members murmured, shaking their heads. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence," Marcus declared, "to remove Arthur Sterling as CEO effective immediately." "Seconded," a board member said. "All in favor?" Marcus asked, raising his hand. Slam! The double mahogany doors didn't just open, they were thrown wide with enough force to rattle the glass walls. Silas, the head of security, stepped in first. Then he stepped aside. Arthur Sterling walked in. He was no longer the shivering man in the alley. He had been transformed. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was slicked back. On his face, he wore a pair of opaque black aviator sunglasses that made him look unreadable, dangerous, and utterly in control. He didn't use a cane. He walked with his hand resting lightly on the arm of a woman walking beside him, Maya. She was still wearing her work skirt and blouse, but her head was high. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the king's guide. "I object!" Arthur's voice boomed across the room, silencing the whispers instantly. Marcus stood up, his face draining of color. "Arthur, you're supposed to be lost?" Arthur finished the sentence, walking steadily toward the head of the table. "Dead? Hit by a bus?" He stopped right in front of Henderson. The manager shrank back in his leather chair, looking like he wanted to disappear into the upholstery. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur said pleasantly, We meet again. Mr. Sterling, Henderson stammered. I was just telling the board how worried I was about you. Worried, Arthur repeated. He turned to the board. This man threw me into the rain. He called me a junkie, and he tried to have me arrested for eating a bowl of soup. Arthur turned his head toward his brother. And you, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a glacial whisper. You didn't just abandon your brother. You abandoned the CEO of this company. You thought that because I lost my sight, I lost my vision. You thought I was weak. Arthur tapped his temple. But you forgot one thing, Marcus. A blind man hears everything. I heard you tell the driver to drive away. I heard you laugh. You have no proof, Marcus shouted, desperate. It's your word against mine. You're sick, Arthur. Arthur smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device, a voice recorder. I may be blind, Marcus, Arthur said, but I dictate all my memos. The recorder was running in my pocket the entire time. He placed the device on the table. He didn't even need to play it. The threat was enough. Security, Arthur commanded. Silas and his team moved in. They didn't go for Arthur. They went for Marcus. Get out of my chair, Arthur said. Marcus looked at the board members. None of them made eye contact. They knew the king had returned. Defeated, Marcus slumped out of the chair, escorted by security. Arthur didn't sit down immediately. He turned to the terrifyingly silent room. He turned to Henderson. Mr. Henderson, Arthur said, you are fired. Again. And this time it's not from the diner. It's from the planet. If I see you near any Sterling property, I will have you arrested for perjury. Henderson fled the room without a word, running past Maya, who watched him go with a satisfied calmness. Arthur finally sat at the head of the table. He took off his dark glasses, revealing his clouded eyes, looking vulnerable yet invincible. Now, Arthur said, let's get back to business. An hour later, the boardroom was empty. The crisis was over. The stock was stable. Arthur stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, listening to the hum of the city below. Maya stood near the door, clutching her purse. She felt out of place now that the adrenaline had faded. I should go, Maya said softly. My shift. Well, I guess I don't have a shift anymore, but I need to pick up Zoe. Maya, Arthur said. He turned around. Where are you going? Home, she shrugged. I have to figure out how to pay rent. Maybe I can find a job at the diner across town. Arthur shook his head. You're not going back to waiting tables. He walked over to her. He moved with confidence now, counting his steps. I have a proposition for you. Maya blinked. Sir, I appreciate it, but I don't need charity. You don't have to adopt me or anything. I'm a grown woman. Arthur laughed. I don't need a daughter, Maya. I have plenty of relatives, and as you saw today, they are mostly useless. He became serious. I need eyes, Arthur said. You have Silas. You have assistants, Maya said. They see what I pay them to see, Arthur replied. They see profit. They see risk. They see what they think I want to hear. He reached out and took her hand, the same hand that had pulled him from traffic. But today, when I was nothing but a nuisance in a wetsuit, you saw a human being. You risked your livelihood to protect a stranger's dignity. You saw the truth when everyone else saw a bum. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope. He handed it to her. I am creating a new position, Arthur said. Director of Culture and People Operations. I need someone who understands that the people washing the dishes are just as important as the people sitting on the board. I need someone who won't let another Mr. Henderson bully my staff ever again. Maya opened the envelope. It wasn't a check. It was a contract. The salary figure made her gasp. It was enough to open 10 bakeries. I don't know anything about corporate strategy, Maya whispered, tears welling up. I can teach you strategy, Arthur smiled, putting his dark glasses back on. But I can't teach character. You have the vision, Maya. I just have the company. He extended his hand. Will you help me lead? Maya looked at the contract. She thought of Henderson. She thought of Zoe. And then she looked at Arthur, the man who had found strength in the dark. She took his hand, firmly. Yes, sir, Maya said, but on one condition. Name it. We put cinnamon rolls on the boardroom menu. Arthur grinned. Done! The world is full of people with perfect eyesight who are blind to what matters, and sometimes it takes a storm to show us who really sees us. True vision comes from the heart, not the eyes.